Hi, and welcome back to the final part of our miniseries on lesbians and gays support the miners during the Great Miners' Strike. If you haven't listened to parts 1 and 2 yet, I'd go back and listen to those first. Where we left off last time, LGSM was in full swing. In terms of its size, the London group had around 100 people go through its meetings at various points, with a smaller central membership. As secretary of the group, Mike Jackson kept track of everyone in London who was involved.
Although we did have lots of people pass through the meetings, and there was no membership of LGSM. You just turned up and you were lesbian and gay, and I say that quite deliberately because the BT plus thing hadn't happened then. There was no such a thing as being a member of LGSM in any formal sense. So at its core, really, I would say there was, 10 or 15 of us who were the core people who consistently went out collecting, consistently came to meetings, went on every visit to Wales.
I asked Martin and then Brett to explain a bit more about how LGSM grew around the country.
I mean, we were very much focused on what we were doing in London. Other groups did spring up, and I think there were about 10 or 11 groups. I think there were smaller groups. I think there was a reasonably sized one in Manchester. Obviously, we had friends and supporters around the country, but when those groups did spring up, it was very much a do-it-yourself, do-it-your-own-way kind of approach. There wasn't any sort of national organisation. It was people linking up with pits that were close to them geographically, I think, in the main. And I think that was just the way it happened, because other groups were forming. It was a national movement. The support groups were a national thing. So people would just set their groups up, raise their money, and send it on. In London at the height, we would probably have in the meetings maybe 40, 50, sometimes 60 people coming along. So, yeah, lots of people became involved, became politicised, and it was quite fascinating. It's fair to say it was mostly men, predominantly younger. There were some significant other people who had been involved in the Gay Left magazine. That was quite an important development. And Nigel Young, who was a prominent member of LGSM, and Jonathan Blake's partner was involved heavily with the Gay Left Collective. Then that was a significant organisation, and we were influenced by that particular organisation. I would say quite a few of us were. It was an important thing, Gay Left Collective at the time. Yeah, the group was. It was mainly white. It was mainly male. I don't think there were many people of colour who were involved at the time. Maybe one or two had come to a couple of meetings. I think to that extent we were probably typical of a lot of political groups, organisations of that time. I'm not saying that's a good thing. It was just a crude reality of where we were politically at that time. There was a small number of women who came along to the meetings. Famously, some of the women decided that they wanted to set up Lesbians Against Pit Closures as their own self-organised group. I think that happened in about November 1984.
Here, Nicola Field of Lesbians Against Pit Closures talked at the time about why they started the group and what they did.
When I first went along to a Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners meeting, initially I was the only woman there, although some other women did turn up for that meeting. And what became clear was that the reason that not many women were involved in the group was partly because there was a core of men who were all actively involved in party politics and were all trying to push their party line and make that the line of the group. And that intimidated and bored a lot of women who weren't involved in politics in that way. So they stopped coming to meetings. So what some of the women in the group and I did was formed a separate lesbian group called Lesbians Against Pit Closures, which we saw as being part of the nationwide network of women that were working in the strike. And we started organising separately.
Well, we do regular collections around lesbian pubs and clubs, and we've planned a benefit for March the 6th, and we do collections outside supermarkets as well, and try and involve other people in what we're doing, as well as the sort of normal activities in colleges and workplaces that other people are involved in as well.
Our podcast episode 13 is about the crucial role played by women in supporting the miners' strike. Another thing people did to support striking miners was supporting them on picket lines and trying to spread the strike to other groups of workers. In this clip from Dancing and Delace, some LAPC members who are helping picket a power station talk more about their activities.
We came along to this picket basically it's necessary to picket power stations to stop the supplies of coal. I don't know if this picket in itself is going to be that successful in doing that, but certainly is a focus for all the people that have supported the miners up and down the country.
At the time, some of LGSM were unhappy with what they saw as a split in the organisation, but others thought that autonomous organising was what LGSM was all about in the first place, so they couldn't really resent others doing the same.
At the time I just didn't see the need for it. Retrospectively, I think it probably wasn't a bad development. I think at the time it was quite different politically, because I think it was more influenced by a kind of radical feminism than anything else. But then again, they did their thing. And they collected the money, and some women wanted to organise in that way, so there was absolutely no problem with it. It just seemed, at the time, it seemed a bit of a shame that we were kind of dividing up. It was quite a shame at the time, but yeah, looking back, it wasn't necessarily. Maybe it's just a logical thing to happen.
The movie kind of looks like LAPC, it was an acrimonious relationship between the two organisations. Well, that's fine, it's a movie, it's not a documentary. There wasn't any acrimony between the two groups at all. There were certainly a few comrades, both male and female, gay men and lesbians, who didn't appreciate a separate lesbian support group, but that was because of their particular politics. For me personally, I didn't care really. I could understand why women might want to, if we were organising autonomously as lesbians and gay men, why shouldn't the lesbians organise autonomously as well? I completely fully understood and accepted that. I can understand the kind of more orthodox socialist line, though, that, you're better off doing things together, united as one. But, that was the politics of the day, really. And in some respects, that kind of division and separation is still continuing to this very day.
It wasn't just a novelty that LGSM was raising money for the miners. They were extremely effective fundraisers, which was absolutely essential, especially given that the government had sequestered the funds of the union, the NUM, and miners and their families were really struggling financially.
Well, apart from the obvious political and moral support we were providing to the mining community, we were a real lifeline, a financial lifeline to the mining communities that we supported. We were sending much needed funds down to them to buy food, clothing, help with bills, whatever the miners and their families decided they needed to spend the money on. And I think at one point, certainly with regard to the mining community in Swansea, Neath and Delace valleys, we were amongst the highest financial supporting groups that they had. So it really was very much, as I say, a financial lifeline, which was keeping the wolves from the doors, if you like. And that was incredibly much appreciated by the miners and their families. It really is very hard to imagine now, I guess, for people. But at that time, the government was literally trying to starve the miners back to work. It really was that bad. It was that serious.
The financial support that was given was really, really important. Consistently, after the trade unions, our biggest single donor. And, we'd seen them raising money in London. We'd been to the events, like the Pits and Perverts. Martin and I were at that. We met up with people. We saw how they raised money and how hard they worked. Vina and I carried the money back, in Vina's capricious. She had this bloody great big fake snakeskin handbag. She put all the money into and then lug it back on the train or on the bus or whatever.
The most high-profile fundraising activity LGSM organised was Pits and Perverts, a gig at the Electric Ballroom in Camden headlined by Bronski Beat, a synth-pop band which had recently released a couple of top 10 singles and a top 10 album called The Age of Consent, which was largely themed around homophobia.
Pits and Perverts ball, 1,500 people there. And the protocol during the miners' strike was if there were any fundraising benefits for the miners, then miners always got in for free, obviously. And so there I was wandering around. I got my Pits and Perverts T-shirt on, and this young Scottish miner stopped me and said, I won't do his accent, and he just said, "Excuse me, mate, have you got something to do with this?" I said, yeah. He said, "I didn't know you people supported us." And you could see he was completely amazed by that. And I just put my arm around his shoulder, gave him a hug, and just gestured to the 1,500 people and just said, "No, you do." And he just smiled at me and winked, and I walked away.
Well, we had the now very famous Pits and Perverts concert in December 1984, which was headlined by Bronski Beat, and there were quite a number of other groups and supporters who came to help us with that concert. With the money that we collected, one of the principal things that we did was to buy a van, a minibus for the miners and their families, which we presented to them. When they came up to London, we presented the van to them, and it had our logo on the side. Well, in fact, no, they had put the logo on it themselves. Yes, that's right. So with the van, they'd got the logo, our logo put on, and they recognised that this was provided by Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. So that was an incredibly moving thing when we saw what they had done with the van. They were using the van in a very practical way. That was to take food supplies up and down the valleys. It was used to take people to the pickets. It really was a very, very practical and valuable resource for the miners. But I do remember particularly the first time I saw that logo on the side of the van. It was a very, very moving thing. And it was, again, an act of solidarity towards us. It was really very much appreciated.
Yeah, and I think as the strike progressed, the solidarity was a two-way process. It wasn't just us giving them the money, the van, etc. There was intense friendships that developed. I mean, it was an incredible feeling, that feeling of solidarity and two communities coming together. I mean, when we went to Wales, we had some amazing times. And when you sat down with individuals, it could be in the miners' welfare hall, you could have some incredible discussions. And it's like real consciousness raising on their part and on our part, really. So it was very much a two-way process that we didn't go in expecting anything from them. It just kind of developed from that feeling of solidarity and mutual aid, if you like.
News about the lesbian and gay support for the strike spread to mining communities across the country.
We did help change attitudes because we were going out to events and meetings and, wider than the women's movement, for example. So friends of mine from other parts of the South Wales coalfields were meeting our friends and coming to stay with them and socialising them. And they were going back to their communities and saying, you know what, that's not true about gay people. That's not true about lesbians, because we've met gay men and lesbian women. And do you know what? They're just like us. So it was a small ball that started rolling.
Another incident was some miners' demo starting in Hyde Park, and or maybe it was after the demo, I can't remember. And again, lots of people sitting down chatting, and I was having a walk through the crowd and fell in with a group again of Scottish miners, and they said, "Who are you with?" And I explained LGSM, and this tiny group, a core of 10 to 15 activists in this tiny South Wales mining community, those jungle drums had swept the British coalfields, because these Scottish miners said, "Oh yes, we've heard all about that." You know, in a situation of struggle like that, when the enemy has got almost all the tools of information and misinformation, what happens is people hone the way that they communicate. And so miners would meet from different parts of the country on a particular picket line, and that's where they would exchange stories and news. So this tiny group supporting a tiny community in South Wales went right through the mining communities. Everybody heard about it. Everybody was talking about it. And that was pretty amazing.
But of course, eventually, the miners were defeated, and in March 1985, they voted to return to work. The defeat of the strike was a pretty crushing blow, but the activists of LGSM and the mining communities of South Wales didn't just give up the fight.
Yeah, the end of the strike was just so depressing and demoralising. It was absolutely awful, and there was a great anger amongst people who have been really active in supporting the miners. That, you know, some in the trade union movement, and particularly the Labour leadership, hadn't really, their heart wasn't in supporting the miners. They were terrified of the prospects, probably, of the miners actually winning. So there was a lot of anger, I think, at the time. It was so painful. It was so painful. It was awful. Well, it didn't put us off from doing other stuff, but we just couldn't believe it. It was the worst possible outcome. It was grim, absolutely.
Yeah, it was massively dispiriting. It was a huge blow. It was extremely hard to come to terms with. This titanic battle had been lost. Margaret Thatcher's Tory government was emboldened. She had triumphed. She went on to bring forward legislation which became known as Section 28, which was the outlawing of the promotion of homosexuality within educational establishments. Something that was hugely significant in terms of, you know, continuing the demonisation of lesbian and gay people. It was all against the backdrop of HIV/AIDS, the whole climate of the time, and especially in the right-wing red tops, was just dreadful. The moral climate that we found ourselves in was just appalling. So in one sense, it wasn't so much what we did next actively. We were responding. Things happened that we had to respond to. And Section 28 was really a hugely significant time. It's almost now, in a way, unthinkable that ever happened. You know, we look to places now like Russia and some countries in Africa where, you know, dreadful things are being done in terms of the persecution of LGBT people. But actually, these terrible things, you know, happened. Some of them happened in our own country, and it feels like it's almost like another world. But at the time, it was just an appalling situation to find ourselves in, and it's something that we had to redouble our efforts and respond to. And thankfully, people did. It took a long time. Obviously, it took the Tories to be booted out of office before we got to the point where we could see the end of Section 28. But that was something that really left its mark in the 80s. And it was a setback for LGBT people, there's no question. But although the miners' defeat was a blow at the time, ironically, I think it did energise an awful lot of people to realise that actually, you know, you can't just sit back, you can't just accept that these things happen. Yes, they are a blow, but you need to rally, you need to organise, you need to redouble your efforts. There were some things that came out of the defeat, certainly for lesbian and gay people, which at the time were very probably difficult to anticipate. But not long after the end of the strike, the NUM supported moves within the Labour Party to adopt a commitment to lesbian and gay rights as part of its constitution. That was a direct result of, I think, the involvement of lesbian and gay people in supporting the miners through the strike.
In Dancing into Lace, filmed in 1985, some women involved in the group effectively summed up the legacy of the organisation and what they hope to build on for the future.
I think it's true to say that Lesbians and Gay Support the Miners brought socialism onto the agenda of sexual politics in the London lesbian and gay community. But at the same time, it took sexual politics onto the agenda of trade union politics. And the existence of the group consolidated a lot of the work that lesbians and gay men have been doing in the labour movement and in the trade union movement for years and years, and actually was a strong factor in the passing of the resolution on lesbian and gay rights at TUC conference last year in 1985.
Since one of the things that lesbians and gays supporting the miners and the miners' communities that have come into contact with them have learned is that perhaps firstly of the existence of each other's communities and of some of the common struggles between those communities, or in those communities, that it would be a great pity to see that dissolve. And so I think it's important that everybody remembers the lessons that they learned from looking at each other's lives and from how we deal with the problems that we have and how we fight back against the oppressions that we find, not just in the government, in the state, but also around us. After all, I mean, a lot of mining communities have found out what police harassment is for the first time, perhaps, and things like that, which gay people have known about for years.
Mike explains more about how a decisive shift in the struggle for LGBTQ rights came about.
Now, what happened after the strike, which was obviously devastating for us to have lost that battle, they took up an invitation from us to come and join us on the 1985 Gay Pride March, which is depicted in the movie. And they worked with us to support the motions being put to both the TUC and Labour Party conferences in late 1985. Now, there were other people who were doing this, the Labour Party members, for example, as far as the Labour Party conference is concerned, and they had been putting pro-LGBT motions to the Labour Party conference for years previously, and every single time it was put back, never accepted. And what was significant in 1985 was that the NUM categorically came out in favour of supporting that motion. And I think, because they'd lost the strike, all the other major unions wanted to do whatever they could to show their respect to the miners. And so basically, the miners supporting it, all the other major trade unions fell alongside them to support it. And that was, a real historic moment. But it really did take years and years and years for the trade union movement to kind of take that on board and do stuff about it. And I think really it developed legs of its own, and people had forgotten what was the spur for that to have come into being in the first place. It just became accepted, and then, of course, we get a Labour government elected, and that stuff is then translated into statutory law. We start to get kind of protection, sacking people because of gay, that kind of homophobic stuff is now made illegal. And then it all culminates in the 2010 Equalities Act. And I think people didn't know how that had happened.
As Mike mentioned, the film Pride ends with a beautiful portrayal of the 1985 Gay Pride March, which, like Mike said, was led by a column of miners marching with LGSM. Sian James was there too.
So, yes, we were on the Pride Parade in 1985. I actually spoke from the stage. After we'd done the march, Mike and a few others came to me and said, we're going to get you up on the stage. We're going to rush the stage. And we're going to grab the mic and you're going to start talking. And I said, oh, Christ, so I turned to Mark and said, I can't do that. I can't do that. You've got to be invited to go and speak, and to go to get on a microphone. My God, people would think we're hooligans. And Martin turned to me and he said, after what these people have done for us, you can get up on that bloody stage and you can keep talking. Right. Anyway, we didn't have to do that because when they were, the organisers approached Mike and the Mon, said, have you got somebody from the Delight who can speak? So I was nominated, and I remember being at backstage at Pride in '85, and the host that year was Tom Robinson, and then the big star was Sandy Shaw. So there I was, back in the green room with all of these famous people, watching people coming on and off. And then they said, it's your turn now. And then I remember, I thought, bloody hell, now you've done it. I think they said there were 5,500 people there on that march. I thought, bloody hell, now you've done it, Sean. Now you've got yourself into a pickle. How are you going to get out of this one? Yeah. And all of a sudden, the front row popped up, waving, their pink banners and their LGSM placards. I thought, it's easy. I'm talking to my friends. So all I've got to do is talk to them and tell them how we feel about things and how lucky we are to have got this relationship. When I came off the stage, Tom Robinson took me to one side and he said, I think I've missed something really special. And I said, you have. Apart from Bronski Beat and people like Jimmy Somerville, there was a suspicious lack of gay acts getting involved, or any stars getting involved, really. And he said, but they love you. And I looked at him and I said, but don't you realise we love them? And that was a special moment when other people could see that the relationship was a very important one for both sides of the equation. So that was great, because that night we got in free to every club in London, because that's all they do is push me to the front and say, this is Sian James, who's on the stage today at Gay Pride. Oh, you can come in, yes. Oh, how much can we pay? No, you can go in for free. So it was lovely. People were so kind and so generous with their praise then. And people were interested. They wanted to hear more about this special relationship. Why had the miners come up to support them? And why had we bothered to come?
We tell the story of the origins of Pride in our podcast episodes 21 and 22. Anyway, after 1985, LGBT young people set up similar strike support organisations to assist different groups of workers in major disputes. For example, at Rupert Murdoch's News International, when he was trying to break the influence of the then powerful organised print workers.
So one of the outcomes of our support group, LGSM, was the formation of a Lesbians and Gays Support the Print Workers. And that was a really significant and slightly overlooked group. They're a bit overshadowed by us because of the film Pride. But it was lesbians, gay men coming together, similar ideas, similar way of working to LGSM. And I was involved a little bit in that, as were other members. But it was a whole new group of people that had set that group up, inspired by the work of LGSM. So they did some brilliant work, and they were involved in the thick of it at the various battles of Wapping, when the police would attack the pickets at the print works. So that was good. And when the film came out, there's a lot of interest in that kind of approach that we adopted, and now we have Lesbians and Gays Support the Migrants, who are again a significant group and doing some absolutely brilliant work, particularly in London. And it was great that they took up the name Lesbians, Gays Support the Migrants, in to carry on the tradition and our way of building solidarity, unconditional solidarity.
Some of the original LGSM crew also reformed the group in 1992 to support miners once more over further pit closures. Now, something which was really important to preserving the memory of LGSM was Mike keeping detailed records, which is a good lesson for any of us involved in organising work today.
If you lose a fight, you lose your history as well. And so many of us immediately in the wake of the strike were so disappointed by it. We'd put all that effort into it, and all that passion into it, and we were beaten. And I certainly include myself in this. I was a bit defeated, you know. I'd got a job by this time, and I just threw my energy into my job and got on with life. And I think that was true a lot of the miners and the mining communities. They really didn't want to talk about the strike. And I get that. That's kind of an obvious reaction. So people weren't going around archiving the history or, you know, acknowledging what they'd done, because we'd been beaten and people just needed to pick themselves up, dust themselves down and get on with life. So we were in danger of what little old LGSM had achieved with this little old mining community in South Wales. And time moves on, people were dying, both in South Wales and of course within our community because of the onset of HIV. And I was prepared to go to my deathbed thinking, you know, that archive that I've left in the People's History Museum in Manchester isn't going to be of any use, because it's a circular argument. If nobody knows about the history, why would anyone go looking for an archive on it, you know? So I just imagined that archive gathering dust year after year after year, and then perhaps somebody in 50 years or 100 years' time discovering it and going, wow, look at this. Yeah. So, you know, I kept copies of press releases and even things like raffle ticket stubs, which now, of course, make great reading for younger people seeing all this stuff. And we've got the ability to put it online now, so, you know, it's readily accessible to people. And that really came from Mark Ashton, because I think after that very first visit that we paid to South Wales, it was such an extraordinary experience, or what happened that weekend. We all came back, driving back to London. We were absolutely buzzing from it all. Ready, I think we were already preparing press releases to the gay press, to tell people what had happened and how well we were received, etc., etc. And Mark said, Mike, your secretary, keep everything, keep it. And as it says in the movie, whatever Mark says, Mike does. But I'm so glad, because Mark was very kind of, I don't know, he had the vision to realise that was important. And I think we all knew it. What we were achieving was extraordinary. We never expected to receive the kind of reception that we got. It was a wonderful surprise to all of us. I mean, you know, at the best of times, working class culture doesn't get recorded or archived because we haven't got the means or whatever. So, you know, I'd really implore people, it doesn't matter how small your campaign is or whatever, it can just be two people's a meeting, two people's a group, record stuff, because it's really important for future generations to be able to touch that history.
At the same time LGSM was forming, autoimmune deficiency syndrome, AIDS, had started killing hundreds of people, disproportionately gay men, and the virus causing it, HIV, had just been discovered. A number of LGSM members contracted the virus, and tragically several have since died as a result, including the co-founder of LGSM, Mark Ashton, who died on the 11th of February 1987, aged just 26. Sian remembers some of those friends she lost.
We knew that Derek was HIV positive. He was one of the first people to go into London Lighthouse. Passed away in London Lighthouse. And I heard Bette Midler speak about during the 90s. She said she spent an awful lot of time at friends' funerals. We spent an awful lot of time at friends' funerals. And that was so destroying, because you saw young, bright, you know, shining, and Mark epitomised this. But Derek was so important to us and other people. They were balls of energy and activism, you know, who had such an influence on other people. It was so sad. You know, Mark went so quickly, but we watched Derek struggle. We were part of Derek's struggle. I remember us being really worried that he had nobody. When Henry passed away, he had nobody to look after him. And Martin said, right, that's it then. You have to come here. And I said, what? You have to come and live with us. You know, if he hasn't got anybody to look after him. We look after him. Now that's, really shows you how far we'd come in those relationships. We weren't interested in what, was this big, massive thing that was affecting our friends. It was the fact was we had to look after each other. These were very, very attractive, shining personalities.
Today for Sian, it's important not to forget what life was like for LGBT people in Britain just a few years ago.
I have to tell young people now about how tough it was for our gay friends in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. Yeah, because now my granddaughter and my nephew can come back from school, there's a year between them, and they take it in their stride if somebody in their class comes out. And they say, oh, so-and-so's come out in class. And there's no, what would have been there when I was a child, tittering and hiding behind, oh, this is terrible, and, teapot jokes and all of this. It's like, so? That's, so-and-so decided to express their sexuality in this way. And I think that's reaching out now to the transgender community as well, where I have friends whose daughters, granddaughters, sons are transgender, and it's not this, lack of understanding. That's not to say that there aren't terrible examples still there, and that we don't need to support young people, when they're coming out. Of course we do. And that's not to say that there won't be, discrimination. Because I think when you've got human beings who are not as open or are being difficult, the far right, etc., you will get that. But I think we're getting to the point where we've got more people in the community now who's going to say, you know what, that ain't fair, mate. No, I'm not interested in this argument. We've moved on from that. So now our job is to tell young people about the bad old days. Because, our local colliery's motto was, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And basically what that means is if you take your eye off the ball, things start slipping very quickly. But as I say, we have to tell young people now. It's really surprising. Lots of teachers say to me, tell them how bad it was. Tell them what it was really like. And I say, well, why? Oh, God, they're quite complacent now. They can't get... And there are 4 words that we don't use in the left now in Britain. And those words are struggle, strike, activism, and action. And, those 4 words, somehow or other, with all the intervening years, either got washed away because they were not necessary, or people moved on to other, their own agenda. So now when I do any public speaking, I talk about those words. I talk about activism. I talk about getting stuck in. I talk about struggle. I talk about getting involved. And I often say, particularly to youth parliaments and to young people that I speak to, I don't care what you get involved in, just get off your asses and get involved in something. And that's what the strike did for us, and all the people that we met.
In 2014, the film Pride, which is about LGSM, directed by Stephen Beresford, came out. It did well at the box office and it received a lot of critical acclaim, with a score of 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, although the reviewer for the Financial Times gave it 1 star, denouncing its, quote, political correctness and support for the, quote, Luddite minors. Personally, I loved it and definitely encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to check it out yet. And it's not something which you have to be a politico to enjoy. It's, enjoyable just as a human story.
Hopefully this movie, and certainly the experience I've had for the last 2.5 years, I've been going around doing Q&As and speaking at meetings, etc., it goes down particularly well with young people under the age of 21. And that took us, everybody surprised. It took the movie company by surprise, it took Stephen by surprise, and it took us by surprise. And yet, time after time after time, that's exactly the age group that adore this movie more than any other age group. I mean, older people love it too as well, but I think that's particularly telling. I mean, the movie couldn't have come out at a better point in time, really, where, we've descended into a politics of absolute despair and hopelessness. And yet this movie shows you that ordinary people can and do effect huge change. And I think it stands as a metaphor for them, as an exemplar for them. So it's politicization of that younger generation, I think, is fantastic. And it will carrying on.
We talk more to Mike and Sian, who are both portrayed in the film, about their involvement in its production in the bonus audio for our Patreon supporters. After the film came out, LGSM and the mining community they supported were again invited to lead the Pride Parade in 2015, 30 years on.
A crystallising moment was 30 years later when, in 2015, LGSM was asked to lead the parade again. When I was on Pride in 2015, as we were marching down the road, a photographer came out, jumped out and took some photographs of me. And she said, "You won't remember me, Sian," she said. And I said, no. And she said, "I took some photographs of you during the miners' strike and I'm still making money on them," she said. And there were a couple of funny little things that happened. As we came on to Oxford Street, there were men on scaffolding, sort of building a building on Oxford Street. They'd knocked an old building down and were obviously putting in some sort of new shopping mall up or something. And they were all up on the scaffolding, waving their helmets and cheering. And Martin said to me, "Look at them," he said. 30 years ago, they were spitting at us. 25 years ago, they were spitting at us. 10 years ago, they were spitting at us. And things had changed so much. You weren't seeing those people saying disgusting or turning away from you. People were cheering and singing along with us and shouting out that they'd seen the film and how much they'd enjoyed it. And that was such a difference. But as Martin said, 30 years ago they were spitting at us, and not at us, but at people spitting at people on the parade and things. And I hadn't realised that was the first gay pride where family and friends were allowed. So we'd been part of a very special thing anyway. Because up until that point, only gay and lesbian people could take part in Pride. But they had decided that year to open it out to family and friends. So that was great to be involved in that. To be on that march with our granddaughter and talking to people and people coming up and telling us about how much they'd loved the film and how much they'd enjoyed it and how much of it is true. People are very warm to the film. That's the thing that's amazed me, that wherever you go with the film, it's like people get it.
Well, that's it for the final part of our mini-series on LGSM. We hope you enjoyed it. We certainly loved talking to all of our interviewees. We did talk more to Mike, Sian, Martin and Brett about the film, Pride, and their involvement in the making of it, and their thoughts on its impact, which we couldn't fit into these main episodes, so we've put that together into a bonus episode for our Patreon supporters. You can support us on Patreon, get access to bonus audio like this, as well as exclusive early access to episodes and more at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Like we said at the beginning of this series, we're only going to be able to keep devoting this amount of time to the podcast after 2019 if we get more support from our listeners. So, as always, we'd like to say a massive thanks to all of our existing patrons for making this podcast possible. Thank you. As always, we've got more info, further reading, photos and videos about LGSM on our website, workingclasshistory.com, and linked to in the show notes. The LGSM crew also collaborated on a great book about the group called Pride, The Unlikely Story of the True Heroes of the Miners' Strike. We'll pop a link to get that in the show notes as well. This episode was edited by Jesse French. Theme music for this episode is by the Kellingly Colliery Brass Band. Catch you next time.